Okay, so let's talk about one of the most incredible, most unlikely stories to ever come out of a war. Seriously, it's the kind of thing you think was made up for a movie, but it absolutely happened. We're diving into the story of the 1914 Christmas Truce, this tiny, unbelievable moment of humanity right in the heart of World War I. But to really get why this truce was so mind-blowing, you first have to picture the absolute hell it sprang from. By the winter of 1914, the Western Front was just a landscape of pure misery. One soldier put it perfectly. The men are settled in mud and the whole color of the scene is mud. Just try to imagine that. Living day and night in freezing, wet, disgusting trenches with the constant threat of death just feet away. It was a bleak, completely hopeless existence. And the human cost was just staggering. By the end of only the first 5 months of the war, we're talking more than 1 million casualties on the Western Front alone. 1 million. This wasn't some distant conflict. It was an industrial-scale slaughter, and it was tearing families apart all across Europe.
Now, the crazy thing is, this was never the plan. Everyone thought the war would be fast, decisive, over by Christmas. That was the famous line. But instead, it just ground to a horrific halt. The armies literally dug themselves into the earth, creating this insane network of trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles. The war wasn't going anywhere. It was just a brutal, bloody stalemate.
And yet, right in the middle of all of that awfulness, something completely unexpected, something truly remarkable began to happen. As Christmas Eve got closer, these little flickers of shared humanity started to cross that deadly space between the trenches, the place they called no man's land. And get this, it didn't start with an order. It started with a song. So here's how it unfolded. Just picture it. You're a British soldier freezing in the mud. All of a sudden, you see little lights popping up from the German trenches. They're putting up small Christmas trees along their line. Then you hear a familiar song drifting across the battlefield. Stille Nacht, Silent Night. Before you know it, your own side starts singing back in English. For a few hours, carols replaced artillery. That led to shouts across the lines, and then the unbelievable suggestion to actually meet in the middle.
Now, this created a massive disconnect. Officially, the orders from high command were crystal clear. All fraternization with the enemy is strictly forbidden. But down on the ground, in the muck, a different, more human logic took over. It was a simple, desperate agreement forged between men. You know shoot, we know shoot. These guys had way more in common with each other than with the generals sitting miles behind the front. And so they did it. At first, very cautiously, soldiers from both sides climbed out of their trenches. They left their weapons behind and just walked into that frozen, cratered wasteland of no man's land. And for one day, this deadly stretch of ground became a meeting place, a temporary sanctuary where enemies met, simply, as men. And they used that precious time to do some pretty amazing things. They exchanged simple gifts, uniform buttons, cigarettes, food from home. They actually worked together to give their fallen comrades lying out in the open proper burials. They showed each other photos of their families. And yes, the most famous part is true. In some places, they even kicked around footballs. It was just this day of surreal, spontaneous peace.
Can you just try to wrap your head around that? One soldier wrote in his diary about shaking hands with the very men I'd been trying to kill hours before. It was astounding. The sheer shock of looking into the eyes of a man you've been ordered to kill and seeing not some monster, but someone who is cold and scared and just like you. It was a moment that defied all the logic of war.
It really makes you wonder, right? For this one brief period, the entire concept of the enemy just dissolved. The men in the trenches realized their true enemy wasn't the German baker or the British clerk shivering across from them. No, the real enemy was the war itself. But, of course, a beautiful, spontaneous moment of peace like this, it couldn't last. A war just can't function if soldiers refuse to see each other as enemies. So, when the news of this fraternization finally reached the high command, they were not pleased. The great big machine of war began to grind back into motion. The response from the top was swift and unambiguous. Stern orders came flying down the line. This had to stop. Immediately. The generals were terrified that if this spirit of camaraderie spread, the will to fight would just completely evaporate. Let's be clear, the truce was not ended by the soldiers. It was quashed from above. The end was just as surreal as the beginning. Men who had been sharing stories just hours before now had to shake hands one last time. They reluctantly retreated to their own trenches. And then, often after a prearranged signal like a shot fired into the air, the killing resumed. The war was back on.
The Christmas Truce of 1914 was never really repeated on that kind of scale. In the years that followed, the war just became far too brutal, far too bitter for something like that to happen again. So, why do we still remember it? Why does this one brief moment continue to captivate us over a century later?
It's because it's such a powerful symbol. It's this profound testament to the idea that even when we are ordered to hate, even in the absolute worst conditions imaginable, our shared humanity can find a way to break through. It's like this small spark of light that reminds us of our capacity for peace and empathy, even right in the middle of organized violence.
And that leaves us with a final, essential question to think about. What does this story really tell us about who we are? Is our true nature to fight, the way the war would suggest? Or is it to connect, the way the truce demonstrated? The story of the Christmas Truce doesn't give us an easy answer, but it powerfully suggests that the choice, however difficult, is always there.